Silicon Slope Summit is Utah's original and longest-running grassroots tech event. It provides entrepreneurs, startups, and leaders the resources and community they need to succeed. With the pandemic behind us, we're excited to bring Silicon Slope Summit back to its original January dates in conjunction with the Sundance Film Festival. We have some unbelievable news. Silicon Slope Summit is free for all Utahns for the first time ever. You heard that right. Silicon Slope Summit is now free. For those looking for an upgraded experience, we are also offering VIP tickets for just $95. Thanks to our partners, sponsors, and government leaders, Silicon Slope Summit is the most accessible tech and startup event in the world. Summit will be hosted in multiple locations throughout the week in both Utah and Salt Lake Valley. There will also be a Startup Alley at Summit this year, where startups and entrepreneurs can meet with investors from around the world to pitch their ideas, receive feedback, and promote what they're building. Of course, we'll be bringing in world-class leaders and speakers, as we have in the past, but we'll also be hosting specific tracks and bringing attendees together for curated networking in a way never done before. You don't want to miss this year's summit. To register, buy VIP tickets, learn about sponsorship, and apply for your startup to be part of Startup Alley, go to siliconslopes.com/summit.
Yo, man.
What up, dude?
Good to see ya. It's been a while.
It's been too long. Where did we see each other last?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
I guess at Derek White's thing, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the best event of the year, honestly.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. Every event that becomes successful, sows the seeds of its own destruction. Right?
You don't need to tell me that.
Yeah, right. You know what I mean?
That's my whole life right there. It's like, oh, this thing's really cool and authentic and grassroots. Let's put millions of dollars into it every year and see what happens.
I know. I just say that because I know that's our common experience, and this year I could feel that a little bit. Which, just talking to the organizers, talking to the people, just knowing it's so great, but you can also feel, the seeds are there for its own destruction.
Events, by the way, I think we're rolling.
Yeah, okay.
Events are really interesting. I wonder, I've actually been thinking about this a lot.
Yeah.
At Silicon Slopes.
Yeah.
As you might imagine, right?
Yeah.
And particularly post-COVID, but even in this age of AI and what makes a community and what do community organizers need to focus on now? Because you remember this, in 2013, 2014, it was such a big deal to even get 100 people in the room.
Yeah.
Let's get 100, incredible things. Then when we did Start SLC and we had, I don't know, 2,000 people, 1,500, 2,000 people.
And it's kind of electric. Crap. Yeah. And it was a moment for everybody. Also, it's it was hard to do, and also what it did for the participants was just different now.
Yeah.
Didn't
you announce a fund there?
Yeah. We announced a fund there, and it was a big moment for us, big moment for the community.
You put together the pitch competition too.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was, have we ever done that again? We had every fund in there.
I don't know if we had every fund since.
You see how much fun that was?
There's probably a couple things in the history of Utah that every fund has done together, and it's maybe that same idea, which is those kind of successes sow the seeds of their own destruction.
Yeah, exactly.
Because people go, oh, that was so valuable. Maybe it'd be more valuable if it was just me or just this group. It's hard, it's hard. It's co-opetition. It's hard to do stuff together. I think the psychology of events post-pandemic is interesting.
I don't know that big events matter as much.
Yeah.
It does seem they matter, but the fact that is they're kind of a pretty common commodity now.
Yeah, I think that's
right.
Yeah.
A lot of people do them. There's plenty. If you want that, you can do it. Again, early on, I brought all those up because none of that was happening.
Yeah.
And now it's happening.
Yeah. which is awesome. Like that's what I wanted. That's what you wanted. So it's happening, but like, the marginal event is not as valuable as it was.
And so then it becomes about, and I wonder what you think about this, kind of more like curated connections and one-to-one connections and smaller.
Yeah.
Like, what are you seeing as you kind of get entrepreneurs and stuff together?
I mean, it's so just in the broader landscape, I'd say that post-pandemic, and it also depends on your age, right? And your experience, right? So, but I think there was a lot of revenge travel. There was a lot of revenge events, right? There was a lot of just people glorying and being able to be with other people. So I think what we're seeing in the pre-seed seed stage, right, is a real kind of renaissance of people embracing being in person and in the office, working together. So I think that's back in a really big way. And you're seeing it with big companies, you're seeing it with small companies. That said, nearly every startup we fund is distributed in some way. But we do find ones that have a nucleus of an in-office culture tend to retain better, tend to have higher morale, tend to execute faster, especially in those early formative times when you don't know what you're going to do and you're trying to figure out and you're trying to just really increase the velocity of decision-making and create the culture you want. It's just hard to do that in a remote context. We certainly have had companies that do that, but that's what we find in general around that whole psychology of in-person. And, events are part of that. But like I say, I think there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I think we sort of expect less out of them.
I honestly this is weird because it's like, it's coming from me.
Yeah.
You don't need to go to that many, if any, honestly.
I think there's some, and also it's probably age thing for you and I too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Like we used to do night events. I was like, there's no way I'm going anywhere past 6 p.m. Are you kidding me?
No. So I think there's a little bit of an age thing too, where it's like, we may have moved out of peak event attending age,
But if I'm an entrepreneur, your take here would be really interesting for those who are like startup entrepreneurs, looking to be entrepreneurs, trying to figure out like, how do I build a network? How do I build a company? Wouldn't you recommend like go to less events and work on your product more?
Well, so probably what I would say is yes, definitely work on your company more, but there's also an element of, what I would probably do is just, I would get face-to-face with people, but try to make it efficient. So for example, the days of me doing like hey, let's catch up over lunch, never happens. I refuse to do it.
Yeah, same.
With people I don't know deeply.
We've gone through a very
similar. And I'm older than you. So I'm probably even more of a curmudgeon on this stuff. But partly it's just like, hey, great. You're being introduced to me. I'd love to meet you. Let's be in office. It's faster, And so because there's just so little time in the day, right? You got to really make these things efficient. So I think I would focus on certainly building your business, your product, whatever stage you are. I think networking is important, but remember that you want to try to offer something of value. And so I think the way you want to do your networking is be valuable to people. If you go out, the people that don't get much traction are kind of the taker types.
Yeah.
So just go out, try to create value for others and have that be a way you connect with others, as opposed to just chatting them up, trying to be funny, trying to be charming, trying to be interesting. See how you can help accelerate other people's careers and businesses. And all of a sudden people, have a tendency to want to help you, right? It's kind of basic psychology. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs maybe miss that. It's really, it's less about who's charming, who's blah, blah. It's like people say, well, gosh, they're helping me. I actually want to spend time with them, So.
Yeah, it's very much like if you're a taker, I would highly recommend never going to events. Right? If you're a giver, I would go to a lot. So that is actually an interesting distinction. I'm sure you've read Give and Take by Adam Grant. And I think that everybody in our community should read it and get an understanding of what it means to build relationships the right way.
But by the way, there'd be a one theory of events. Like let's say when at a point where an event gets to the death zone or the spiral, the negative spiral, when let's say that the room is 70% takers. who are all just trying to extract from each other.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? And and like, so anyone, again, it's a terrible, it's not that simple, but like there are some events like that where you're like, you feel like you're surrounded by piranhas if you go to that event. And pretty quickly, anyone who maybe was trying to help somebody is like, I can't be at that event because it's just, I feel like I'll be sucked dry.
Yeah. You don't want the more events that we do and the more questions we get, like, what ROI do we get out of this?
Yeah.
I'm like,
no, totally.
Like back in like 2013, 2014, like when I came to you for like Start SLC, I'm like, will you sponsor this? I don't remember you saying what ROI do we get for this? You know what I mean? Like, and you probably did get an ROI in some way.
Absolutely. I think but
it wasn't like impressions to a website or so many leads or anything like that.
In some ways, if you start asking that question, then you're kind of at the beginning of the end, some level, because you're like, you've reached some critical mass, right? And we do a lot of events for our insider portfolio, and we've evolved how we think about that for these same reasons, which is we feel like, wow, there's a lot of events.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and I think what really felt unique and valuable to certain parts of our portfolio, now we feel like CEOs are like, I'm doing you a solid by sending my people to this event. We're like, okay, that's not really, we don't want it to be a favor.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, okay, that's, you know what I mean? And that's and that's in some ways, that's the ROI question, which is like, okay, this is, we're circling.
When Summit started getting like more of like a national event versus a local event was when I would get on calls with like Visa and they're like, what is the ROI? And I'm like, ROI? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, we're just trying to build a community. Like, we don't care that you're trying to build a community. We're Visa.
Like, tell me about, subscribers.
I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. So now we actually do need to tweak how we're doing this and what we're trying to do. As you're investing in pre-seed and seed and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
My word, what is it like every day as a startup entrepreneur in this environment where it seems like literally every day AI can do more and more and more of what used to be moats for companies?
Sure. Yeah.
Like you're not going to need a software developer in a year. Maybe. I don't know. Like that's an extreme statement, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, whoa.
This is crazy. I mean, it's exciting. I think it's I went through a period after the release of Chat GPT, as we were all playing around with, Elms for the first time, and we were really kind of all thinking about the implications, kind of wondering, okay, what is the role for startups? What is the role for VCs in this new world? I think where it's settling out is it's super exciting, the most exciting platform shift in technology since the internet, from my perspective. However, the realities of AI on the front lines of someone who's funding entrepreneurs to, work with consumers, work with customers, it's still software. It's still hard. It still doesn't work most of, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a new layer of software. It's awesome, and what will happen is in some ways we have companies that are moving dramatically faster because they're using AI tools in their development and their testing and their deployment in their core product, et cetera, et cetera. But it's still hard, and then the excess resource you free up because the efficiency of the technology, you could say, well, we don't need them, but instead you redeploy them elsewhere to gain a competitive advantage. And at some level, the benefits to AI, just like other great technology evolutions, get competed away, right? They get priced in.
Interesting.
So yes, the nature of so many jobs is going to change. It's mainly just exciting because it will give superpowers to a lot of different kinds of roles and people, and roles will change. But we're, it's the front lines of this are actually, they're super exciting, but they're also a little bit like, oh, okay, shoot, it's still hard.
Yeah, it's still hard.
Yeah,
for sure. And you've got to, regardless, like, hey, you can build something faster, which I don't even know that you can quite yet in terms of like software and things. But there's certainly some things you can automate that you never could automate before.
Totally.
Save tons of time.
Yeah, totally.
So that's incredible.
Yeah.
But you still got to know that industry. You still got to know that. You still got to solve the problem.
Yeah, there's still problems. There's workflow. There's integrations. There's a user experience that matters. So 100% you can do things a lot faster. And even before this latest kind of LLM driven AI wave that we're seeing now, there was so many software solutions, fighting for attention and dollars from businesses and consumers, that there was going to be a reckoning at some level. And so we're going through that, and really software has always been fundamentally about the automation of work.
Yeah.
And AI is just taking that, another order of magnitude better. And so we're seeing amazing success with companies who are giving superpowers to creators, to, healthcare providers, you name it. Which, is super exciting to see that.
Yeah.
But like you say, but also kind of, there's just real issues to getting this technology adopted and getting it used and then customers continue to pay for it. And, it's just the same old thing,
Yeah. One company that you're invested in that I think does a really good job at that is Zencastr.
Yeah. Yeah.
Zencastr is by the way, we don't talk enough about that.
Yeah.
That's a great company.
Yeah. Great product.
That's a great product. It's as good as their competitor who I won't name.
Yeah. Thank you.
But it's as good as them, if not better in a lot of ways, actually. And my word, that came out of Utah. That doesn't happen. That type of company doesn't come out of Utah that often.
Yeah. And I think that's a good example of other companies we're finding that are product and engineering forward. I think that's very much what Zencastr is. The original founding team are very much, builders. They're in the podcasting space, which is all about promotion, but they're actually more like, hey, let's ship great product and let our product speak for itself. And I think we're seeing more and more companies like that here that are, and then building go-to-market muscle. Once they get critical mass. But we're really happy with what they're doing. A lot of happy creators using, including us, using their products. So.
Yeah, I use it too. What do you think the future of SaaS is versus AI agents? Because the next phase of this AI thing is going to be agents. And I think that's really where things get kind of interesting, where literally your AI agent is clicking on the computer for you and doing all of this stuff.
Right.
Like, what do you think the future of SaaS is? Is it just integrated with, because you saw Salesforce. Now you can build your own Salesforce AI agent.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. No one, and no one knows actually. Right. So, I live in this world. I will just say the way I think about software is very simplistic, which is most users, consumers or businesses, and we spend a lot of time with business users, they're just trying to get something done. They actually could give a rip how they get it done. Right. Like if it's a frigging like what the phones that have the dial, like they use that and the calls in it. Hey, if I could have one of those and I could just call somebody and talk to them and say, hey, I need these things done, and it was awesome. Like, let me do that.
Yeah.
And so, some technology is fun to use, others is not, but they're trying to accomplish certain tasks. And the solutions that win are the ones that allow them to solve those pain points, specifically the pain points most efficiently at the lowest cost. Hopefully with some delight and with some stickiness and allowing them to level up and do more things, right? So yes, the agent idea is super interesting, and we could see how, but it may totally fail, like other ideas have.
Yeah, for sure.
Based on existing investments that people have or the way they work, or so we'll see. But clearly, I think it's important in the software space to always keep it at a level which is saying, hey, no one cares about this technology, actually. I mean, some people do.
Yeah.
But like 90% of users, they're just trying to get something done.
Yeah.
So help them get it done.
Exactly.
And they don't care about your architecture. They don't care about your da-da-da-da-da. They care about getting that thing done. And maybe it's an email. Maybe it's a podcast. Maybe it's facilitating a meeting. And tying to those business needs is what the great companies do. And they do it with technology, but they do it in a real human form. And so that's what we're seeing in our companies is, and sometimes the technological piece is really just the last, think about it, use a football metaphor. It's the last 5 yards, the last 2 yards where you just punch it in. And that technology is not that hard.
Yeah.
But it sort of takes it from, hey, this is kind of hard to like, oh, this got really easy. And I think we're seeing this, in the Chat GPT world where, what Apple's trying to do, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly that Apple's vision, got the latest iPhone waiting for me, and I'm kind of bummed that it looks exactly like my previous one. However, I'm buying this with the hope that like, wow, if I actually can have something even close to ChatGPT that's native on the phone that actually runs the apps for me,
that's pretty cool.
and it's not like, I mean, how many times when you interact with Siri do you end up screaming at Siri?
Yeah,
like I
never interact with Siri.
I actually don't ever yell at anybody, but I would say, and I don't use Siri anymore, but like when I did, it would be like half the time I yell at her.
Yeah,
because it's because it's so annoying. It's kind of like it's like the automated speech thing. It's anyway, so we're kind of in that uncanny valley with like so much of the AI stuff where it's actually harder and worse. And if we can just get, a little bit forward, I think, the use cases are going to be incredible.
You just made a really interesting point that I want like people who are listening to understand. And that is nobody cares what software you're using or how you're solving the problem as long as you're solving the problem.
Yeah.
When we were running iZeni, we would always talk about, specific languages. Like, let me tell you, Python is so great. And if you want front end, Django's the only way to go. Yeah. And we'd meet with clients. And we'd meet like Blake Murray comes in with Divi and we're like, you got to build it on Python. You got to build it. Yeah. And all this types of it's like, can we just solve the problem? Yeah. You can do Ruby on Rails. Ruby, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We don't care.
Yeah. And that's like, some people care for sure, but like the majority of the world does not.
Yeah.
Is agnostic and you got to kind of stay focused on what's most important.
But what do you think about this tried and true SaaS model, which Utah is so great at? Yeah. Probably the second best in the world outside of Silicon Valley.
I believe SaaS. I believe so.
What's the future of that?
Certainly we're in for some change, but I feel like the new vertical SaaS focused on SMBs or enterprises is going to be, B2B SaaS plus AI. They're all saying it now. Okay. Some actually have it, in different ways. And then you kind of get in specifically, okay, where can you compete in AI? But it's really just, and AI is like other stacks of the software architecture where there's some parts that go to big players and there's some parts that go to smaller players and there's some in between. And so I think what I'm feeling very comfortable with is there's definitely a role for startups. And to navigate and create value between all the large players. We are in a unique moment where the large players are innovating in a way that large companies haven't as much in the past.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Which is, I think, exciting.
What Zuck's doing is blowing my mind.
No, these are some amazing leaders. There's some, they have incredible advantages in terms of data and scale and teams.
Unlimited money.
Yeah, unlimited money, right? Regulatory capture. I think you can't leave that out. But I think there's lots of spaces for startups. So I'm very confident that here in Utah, and we play across the Intermountain West now as we have an office in Denver, that there's just great opportunities for startups. We haven't really seen a slowdown. This is a grindy, kind of crappy time for startups right now. We haven't really seen a slowdown in the number of startups being created. We're certainly seeing a slowdown in the ability to sell those companies, to go public, to be acquired at good multiples. It's challenging, follow-on rounds, all that's challenging, but there's a ton of creation. There's a ton of focus, back to basics focus on building customer value, right? And so I think that's what we're seeing is, and so for some companies, the majority of the benefit from AI is them just architecting from the ground up their marketing team, their dev team based on AI tools. Yeah. We're definitely seeing smaller companies get benefit and economies earlier versus larger companies, partly because they can just architect around earlier. That makes sense. And it may be all off the shelf, it may be all internal. Yeah. So in some ways, that's like, 1.0 for startups, just like use the latest tools.
Yeah.
And get the velocity. And then, hey, if you can do something uniquely for customers with your own AI solution, again, not saying that you have to do it all proprietary, then that's awesome too. And many are. We have several that are doing that. But I'd say that's the new, it's the new stack for B2B. Yeah. B2B SaaS, what is it? Automating work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Making workers, knowledge workers, and other kinds of workers more efficient. Huge need for that. Labor shortages up and down across the developed world, demographic challenges. there's just so much need for more productivity to kind of keep the standard living of the world where it is. So I think the secular trends are very much in favor of this, but some incumbents are going to lose. There's going to be disruption. That's sort of been the story, right?
Yeah.
But this is a big one.
Sure.
This is a bigger disruption.
Well, this isn't Web3.
Yeah.
Which was all hype, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I never understood Web3. Like, I understand the technology. I understand what blockchain is, and I understand how it can be used. But I never understood, like, I bought Christensen's book, Read, Write, Own.
Yeah.
It's a great book, actually. It goes deep on Web3 stuff. But when they say read, write, own, we can do that right now.
Right.
Which is this really interesting piece. But like, no, you own. Like nobody, like you were saying, like nobody cares about that.
Yeah.
Can you get
I think that's one of the challenges with the Web3 movement from my perspective. It was about in love with a technology, almost like a dogma, as opposed to a solution or a platform or a share, again, so it fell short of expectations for sure. We'll see, it might have another life. But yeah, I think the use cases really struggled to show value versus existing use cases. And, so yeah, it's maybe example of falling in love with a technology as opposed to a solution.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's a great technology of course.
Yeah. And, long term, it does feel like there's a lot of applications, ownership, identity, other things where it's like, yeah, this is probably how it will be done, but we probably got to figure out more efficient ways for it to be done. Yeah.
You mentioned something that I think about a lot, which is regulatory capture. And I mentioned before, like how impressed I am with like what Zuck is doing.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't like it for startups. I don't really like it for, we have like 5 or 6 monopolies in this country that really dominate this stuff.
Right.
And that now if they don't need to acquire startups, or they don't think they need to acquire startups, what does this mean?
Yeah.
So we start like thinking about that. And then you have like, you saw like Sam Altman. I might get in trouble because I asked him to come to Summit. Maybe he won't come. But Sam Altman goes before Congress says we need to regulate, and you really only need like 4 or 5 of these really big companies. The less, the better, because you guys will be able to keep an eye on them easier. All this type of stuff.
Yeah.
That is so gross.
Super
gross. That is so gross.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, really, it's like classic regulatory capture language. That's a really scary. I mean. So one of the things I've done in the last few years, which has been interesting for me, is I've sat on the board of the National Venture Capital Association, and in that role, I've spent a lot of time with senators and members of Congress on issues specifically for venture capital and startups. Small tech, not large tech. And there's for a lot of issues there's alignment there, but there's a lot of issues where we're not. The large tech is its own atmosphere versus small tech, and so. There's so many unintended consequences, right? Where, I think the administration, the regulatory infrastructure thinks, oh, we're going to hurt large tech by not letting them buy these, snap up these small companies. And it's like, well, you don't, the unintended consequence, which we've been educating people on, is like, actually, you're going to have less startups if you do that, because the VCs assume they can sell at some point and not just go public. If they can't do that, they're going to fund them less, and you'll have less competition. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, another great example is the private funds rules that were being talked about, where, the US is an amazing place, However, there's a lot of countries that work harder than we do, right? On hours worked, there's a lot of smart people in the world. For the US to maintain its role in the world as the superpower in science and technology and defense, we gotta, some things. And if we lose our innovation ecosystem, which has a lot to do with venture capital and startups, and where that's the core of it, and a lot of it's driven by immigration, legal immigration, and it's like things like the private funds rule. You're like, you are going to kill the golden goose. And I don't care where you are on the left, right, or center. If we lose that status, the U.S. in the world, nothing else matters. Yeah, it kind of doesn't matter what your policy positions are at that point, because you're not in a position to really choose a lot of things. Yeah. So anyway, there's I've been encouraged by several members of Congress and senators about their sophistication. But some of these things that are put forward, you're like, the naivete is incredible. Yeah. Where you're like, you don't even, you don't know how this works.
Yeah.
You've never had a job.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't know.
Doesn't it seem like the higher and higher you go, the less and less they know in terms of like their titles?
It can be that way.
Kind of wild.
It can be that way. And I will say I haven't come out cynical, because I'm encouraged that you can have a dialogue and people listen and they care, and they're probably a little more. They tend to be the most controversial when the lights are on them, right? They're on whatever news channel, try to get sound bites and stuff. Sure. So I don't know. So I'm like less cynical than maybe you might think, but also I'm just reminded how important it is to battle, to be in those kind of conversations, and not assume that the startup world and the venture capital world and other like this golden goose of innovation that we have in the US, but specifically in Utah, is people know how it works and that how to keep it going.
Yeah.
And Utah's been on this incredible run. You've been part of that. We've been part of that. We want to see it continue. I mean, we're just, we're the top of every major kind of way an economy is good.
Yeah.
Including some of the really cool things like income equality and and economic dynamism and these things that are like the American dream.
Yeah, it's the number one state for upward mobility.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
that's such a cool stat.
I mean, that's in some ways that's the one I'm most proud of.
Yeah,
and so in a lot of times that's less about the founder, and the venture capitalist, and that's way more about the employee, number 20 and employee number 200 and employee, who getting these shots to kind of build, their economic position and that of their kids. And we're seeing that in Utah, which is cool.
The governor's office came out with like, we're the startup capital of the world, which is debatable. I think that's one of those where like bold. It's that's a bold, and maybe it's like a visionary statement. It's actually not debatable. We're not. But I don't know why I said it was debatable.
Yeah. I think that's fair. We're definitely not what we aspire.
Yeah, we aspire, which I think is great, and I think it's great branding for us.
Yeah.
But what I think we might be is the entrepreneur capital of the world.
Yeah. Certainly on a per capita basis.
On a per capita basis, I think we have more entrepreneurs than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
I can't prove that, of course.
Yeah, I think
but it just feels like that.
There's certainly studies that have been done. You've probably seen the one that's unicorns per capita is one, and certainly the way our universities are turning out entrepreneurs suggests highest per capita. There's some unique cultural aspects to what we have here. The success that we've been having, I think really lets a lot of people, and really the the connectedness of this community means that information and stories flow, and so does hope, right? So that's really neat, So I love that about this place. And back in kind of 2008, when I was trying to figure out where Kickstart should have its nexus, that's why Utah. I mean, I have a lot of affinity for Utah, but that's why Utah was the pull, and it was less about the outcomes and more about just the broad just level of entrepreneurship in terms of how people see themselves here.
Yeah.
And there's cultural things. I feel like it's, when I describe it to people that aren't from here or not even from the US, I talk about the myth of the West, right? It's a place to go, regardless of what you come from. A chance to remake yourself, where there's not artificial limits on what you can achieve. It's super cool.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And as you were building Kickstart, you were the first like true seed fund ever in the state of Utah in 2008. And what was it? It was like 14 million?
4 million.
4 million.
I mean, for the first little while, it was 4 million. Yeah. So we had our first close in like April, May of 2008. And then that summer is when Lehman went down. And so we were 4 million for a while. And, I was living in New Mexico, kind of coming back and forth, spending time at V-Spring. It was a crazy, crazy time for me. I just graduated from business school. It eventually became 8 million, but still, I always would say that it was a struggler little fund that we could fund companies about maybe halfway to somewhere interesting. So they were sort of, we were kind of we would joke too that it wasn't a bridge, it was a pier. It was like we'd fund them and it's like wide expanse of water and like, okay, here we are.
Yeah.
And it was tough. We learned along with our entrepreneurs, but proved enough early that we could go on to do a second fund. And then really, I think the ecosystem here just took off, which was very helpful for us.
Yeah, I always think of you as much an entrepreneur as a venture capitalist, particularly given that how hard that was in 2008. Yeah. That's almost an impossible story. The fact that you came out of that is pretty remarkable. What did you learn during Fund 1 that kind of shaped the rest of the funds? What fund are you at now?
6. Yeah. You can believe that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I was asked recently, like, what is my company I've invested in that I'm most proud of? And it's easy for me, which is Kickstart.
Yeah.
Because that's the one where I've, put the most of myself into, despite we've got a lot of great companies that I am very proud of what they've achieved, but this is the one that I suffered the most for, personally, and, took a lot of risk for, and went through a lot of existential moments where it almost was dead a lot, which every entrepreneur can relate to. It was almost dead then, and it was almost dead then. And, so I would say I'd say a lot of what I learned, are the lessons of a founder, what it takes to try to get product market fit, this is more of a services asset management business, but how do you build a culture? How do you choose a strategy? Things like that is certainly a lot of things I learned. I would say I should have doubted whether this would work. And many times I never did, weirdly. And again, that's a good and bad trait in many entrepreneurs. But I always had conviction that Utah would be worth it, right? If we could just make it happen and be there for the entrepreneurs, it was going to be very successful. Now, thankfully, that's played out. And I would say I largely feel a lot of relief about that, versus anything else. We definitely learned, specifically in the venture business, that we loved pre-seed and seed, that we needed a bigger fund to actually have it be successful in terms of like having enough money to help the entrepreneurs. We focused a lot on commercialization in the first fund out of universities, which we think is a great opportunity still, but became more focused on things that were already out of the universities. Mm-hmm. Focused more on the entrepreneur than the technology. In our stage, and I think the quality of entrepreneurs changed a lot, frankly, from our Fund 1 to Fund 2. Fund 2 was more in the 2012 timeframe. And the go-to-market chops, the scrappiness, and really, we were one of the first, not seed funds, certainly in this region, but in the world. Mm-hmm. And there were so many enabling factors that allowed seed funds to even happen. Technology stacks, shared services, things like AWS, the advent of SaaS, right? All those things were really new.
Yeah.
I remember I wrote a white paper during business school that I, talked about the business web 2.0, and it was this crazy thing called SaaS, and at the time there was like 2 examples.
Yeah.
And really that made seed funding possible as an economic activity. Because prior, you just had to spend so much money on licenses and hardware that it was really hard to have a successful fund.
Yeah.
So anyway, lots of lessons. We definitely learned the kind of entrepreneur we like to invest in, the stage, and the kind of industries that made sense. We're like, okay, no more pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah, no, clean tech's tough for a seed fund.
Particularly with only $8 million. It's impossible.
Yeah, we did. Ironically, we actually made money on a pharmaceutical bet in Fund 1. Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, interestingly enough, and I was telling my wife this recently, Fund 1 is not a financial success. Our other funds are in a lot of ways wild financial successes, but our first fund is not. She's like, wow, you're really fortunate you raised a second fund. And I'm like, yeah, 100% I am, and it looked very promising, but a lot of what happened was, one of my mantras in venture capital is you kind of need to win every round, both the entrepreneur and you as a seed funder. If you have one bad round, you're kind of toast. And we didn't have the ability to follow even our successful companies, and had successful companies where we didn't win, you know? So, which is always hard.
Well, again, I think probably one of the main reasons you were able to raise a second fund is you'd cultivated the ecosystem as much as like you were doing stuff for for Kickstart and building a fund.
Yeah.
You were actually like showing like there was an ecosystem of entrepreneurs before that was like a thing, and like kind of getting them together and, you know, kind of teaching Utah what venture capital was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure a lot of people even knew how that worked.
100%. I mean, what people don't realize about it, and that was always the bet, is like, hey, we're building a fund, but we're building an ecosystem. And, you know, there's other people doing it too, the companies, you know, like this organization, other folks. So it was definitely a joint effort. But our piece was, you know, we would lead a deal, and then we would write a memo, you know, and we would like be sharing it with angel investors, and we'd be teaching the angel investors about terms. And a lot of times we'd be saying, yes, we could do this, but we're not, because we're going to regret that, or that's going to set the wrong precedent. Yeah. Or like, it was this mantra of, let's play a long game. Like, let's treat the entrepreneurial community with respect. Like, just because we can do a thing doesn't mean we should.
Yeah.
And things like that. And what's normal at the next round. And you know, and it's what's crazy is to go back and look at some of the memos we wrote and the analysis we'd done on some of these early companies, even something like a Lucid, and see what our expectations were, even if it went really well. And they're pretty modest. I mean, we were off by an order of magnitude, if you can believe that, in terms of what the outcome could be on something like a Lucid, even in our best case scenario. And it's partly because there just hadn't been many examples about what was possible. And so that's been also something that we've seen, which has been super exciting. You've seen this, is the raising of expectations.
Yeah.
From every aspect, you know, each participant in the ecosystem, and then and what's possible in terms of the outcomes and the impact we can have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And seeing an example, to me, I think was critical for like Josh selling Omniture to Adobe.
It's huge.
And showing, hey, I can get a Silicon Valley exit in Utah without having to live in Silicon Valley. And seeing Adobe being built, I think that was like, I mean, there'd been a number of successes, but that was a key moment. I still think the best year and the defining year of the ecosystem is 2014.
Yeah.
When all those companies just started raising massive amounts of rounds. And you'd never even like, unless you were in the community, like you wouldn't have heard what Qualtrics was, what Pluralsight was. You would probably hear what Domo was, because there's billboards everywhere. But, you know, like, but those two in particular, like you wouldn't have heard of until they announced it.
Yeah.
And announced like, oh, we just raised $175 million.
Totally.
Like, will you do that in Utah?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That was a big moment. Just you know, and a lot of it was, you know, again, we were fortunate. We had builders who were really focused on building real businesses in technology, but real businesses. And and then I think seeing success with someone you know somebody who knows, and you're like, wow, why not me?
Yeah.
And that's, and it just kind of spiraled from there. And just super cool. And we're in a new era. A new generation of builders.
Completely. It's completely different. And the other thing that I think was huge just back then in 2014 is we had two companies get into Y Combinator. Back when that was a big deal. Yeah. It may still be a big deal, but I don't.
It's sort of, it's kind of.
But it was a huge deal in 2014.
Less signal in it now, probably.
When Weave and Randall Bennett's company, I think it was VidPresso, which he ended up selling to Facebook. When they got in, and that was around the same time where they were raising big rounds, and you were seeing like these early stage companies also seeing some success. Like, this is crazy that this is happening here.
Yeah.
I think that's very motivating to the rest of the community. Like, all right, this can happen. We are in a completely different generation though. And it seems like I actually think the entrepreneurs are far more intelligent now. They're far more, because obviously they should be, like as we grow and learn from each other and mentor.
Yeah.
It just seems like, what do you think about this current crop of leaders we have?
I mean, I think there's a lot to be really optimistic about, because like you say, I think one of the things that we've done well in Utah has been that those that have been successful have reinvested their time, energy, and money in the next generation in important ways. And there's too many ways to enumerate, but that makes for like each generation can be better. Now, I think there's ways that we definitely want to be better, right, than each generation. And, you know, it like there's a lot of choices to be made. Success is challenging for people to handle in a bunch of different ways, especially when it comes fast. You know, probably the good news for the current generation of builders is it's going to come slow. It's going to be hard, and you're going to have to, it's going to be more like the 12, 14 class than maybe the 21 class, or, you know, where it's going to go slow. I think
you're going to get bigger companies.
Yeah. I think you'll end up with companies. Yes. Ultimately they'll be way bigger because they're going to build based on what solving solutions instead of be capital driven. And that's what we've always done well, is building real businesses that scale, that happen to be technology. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. Cause I don't know that there's anywhere else in the US where there's so much just goodwill that goes back in reinvestment. You know what I mean? It's kind of the same reason our schools work. Yeah. Like there's a hidden subsidy of like moms and dads, but a lot of moms that are putting so much talent and time into the schools, and where you're like, yeah, the class sizes are too big, but look at these, how are they getting these test scores? Well, there's a huge subsidy going on of people giving their time. Yeah. And kind of the startup world is not that different. People are really still willing to kind of be Team Utah, which is cool.
Yeah. Don't you think we're seeing like a different type of entrepreneur? Like it did seem like in the early 2010s or whatever, the leader of those were great at sales. Yeah. Really great at sales, really great at marketing. Like if you could do those two things, you could sell devs and all these stuff to join you. So you'd be really great at recruiting. You'd be great at like differentiating yourself from your competitors. And we were so good at that. And we're still incredible at that.
We still are.
Right.
Yeah.
But now it's a little bit like, I'm thinking like what Walking Shaw's building, and not that he's great at sales too, but like, man, that is like a deep tech, deep problem. Like what he's going after, like the fact that that's being built in Utah is like,
it's cool.
I love it. Proud.
I love it. We have, there's a lot of successful consumer here now, which, that you could say, hey, that's more marketing and sales. But yeah, I think there's many more companies that there's like heterogeneity in terms of the talents of the founding team. It might be product and engineering forward. It might be, we talked about Zencastr, or like a Lucid type company, or there's marketplace companies that are like a Nursa, that are doing some really hard things, building a different kind of business, consumer, like a Pura or a Traeger. And yeah, it's cool to see different kinds of entrepreneurship, different kinds of team. But like I would say, like overall, like a pretty cool generation of founders and leaders that really are invested in building here and doing it right, playing a long game. We'd love to have more public companies in Utah that are platform companies for the state. And I think that the foundations are being laid for those kind of companies.
It's hard to be a public company. Do we really want public companies? Do you think do you want, I know eventually you do, but like I see like Stripe, they're doing just fine.
Yeah, it depends on what your market is, but ultimately, like the best companies in the world are public companies, right? Yeah. In terms of like the prestige, the currency, the ability to attract talent, and the liquidity. So I think that for us to take the next step as a region and a market, like having, from our perspective, local acquirers is how we see them. Big exits and acquirers, how we see them, and just. They love to acquire stuff in their backyard, right? Because it's easy to integrate. And so I think that's important.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard right now. It's a challenging environment to go public and stay public. And so, I'm sure that will not always be the case.
Yeah, for sure. It always goes in cycles there. I am really impressed on the consumer side, how much that market has grown inside of Utah. Thanks again, like, we point to, the guys who, made SaaS what it is.
Yeah.
But you got like Jeremy, you've got Davis Smith. What Jeremy's done, Jeremy Andrews has done for the state of Utah is, we should build a statue for like, I honestly think it's like pretty incredible.
Let's go easy,
I know you play tennis with him. You don't want to inflate his ego too much.
We gotta, he's amazing. He's amazing.
And Susan Peterson with Freshly Baked. There was like all of these really cool, and now it just seems like we're really good at that too.
Yeah. No, we've got a lot of successful consumer.
Crumble is a nutty company.
Yeah, it is.
That is the amount of revenue that thing does.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's out of control.
And just in that same vein, Swig
will be as big as Starbucks, I think.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
It's amazing. So there's a lot of wins across the board. And So I don't think that's going to slow down. Consumer, especially consumer subscription, is an interesting category for us. Chatbooks and Pura, and so I just think more breadth is amazing for us. And then I would love to see more deep tech companies in the AI space specifically. We don't have a national lab here. We don't have these huge research centers that maybe other regions have. So it will take some real kind of fundamental investment in those things. But, we've got great universities and we have just a lot of talented entrepreneurs, and we'll get there.
Yeah, it'd be really cool if we were, and some companies are. I think we're going to be a big energy hub.
Yeah.
I was at some poker thing, and the guy next to me is like, "We've raised $35 million. We're based in Salt Lake." And I can't even remember the name of the company. And their whole thing is around energy. And I'm like, "Why Utah?" They're like, "Well, Central Utah is the greatest energy place in the world." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I didn't even know any of this stuff until like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to be great there. Another one that we're great at is fintech. And I wonder what you're seeing.
Yeah.
If that's still going. You had, and again, early people who were in that, like Ryan Caldwell at MX.
Sure.
So awesome to see him back. And the Divvy story, I don't think we'll ever see again. And we've never seen it before, never seen it again.
Yeah.
In 5 years to get $2.5 billion.
Yeah, it's amazing. Incredible outcome.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Galileo is a huge outcome.
Galileo's
for
incredible.
us and others. And I mean, it's there. Yeah. There's a history with like, a very business friendly state, creating these, ILCs and other kind of banking infrastructure here. It's one of the backbones of the LP community here, which is huge. So we have some, we've got great natural resources and mountains and deserts, but we also have in terms of regulatory. You look across the country, and there's not many states that, like Utah, that where the government works, stays out of the way of business, and celebrates its winners, and solves problems. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so that's like a huge competitive advantage. And so I think in the fintech realm, it's led to a fertile arena to start great fintech companies with local customers, local partners. We've had some good success in that area, and we're seeing a decent amount of activity there.
Yeah.
And I think there's the opportunity for, some of these are ZERPy, right? Where it was like, well, okay, money was free, so that was easier. Harder now for some of these business models, and so you have to. There's less of the ZERPy business models, but there's some. There's a lot of kind of more fundamental innovation happening now that I think is exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you think it's interesting around the fintech and how they've grown out of there and how that's working? Like, what's the next version of that? Like, what are we, like, we have EdTech too with like Instructure and a couple of EdTech big wins. Instructure's an enormous win.
Yeah. Degreed, another good
Degreed. But what's the next frontier? Like, what are you looking at? Like, if an entrepreneur is looking at this or watching this or listening to this, like, where would you suggest they spend some time researching?
What I love, so we do a lot of SaaS, and we go pre-seed and seed typically, and we're not thematic investors. We don't spend a ton of time, researching trends and saying, hey, this is the way the world's going to go or not. What we're actually way more interested in is what I call founder opportunity fit, which is like, we ask the question, why now for this business, this idea, this concept, and then why this person? And often there's something about the biography of that person that, maybe to use my own example, I wasn't somebody who was probably going to start any other business than this one. But for whatever reason, I fell in love with this and refused to take no for an answer. I think that's often the case with businesses that we back that go really well, where we have a founder or founding team, for whatever reason, they've identified this pain point in the world and they want to solve it. And there's 10 ways to solve it. And they usually they will have to try 4 or 5 with our money to get there. So rather than focusing on technology, what's rare in the world is somebody who knows a thing, knows one thing that's actually narrow enough that and maybe boring enough to other people and mundane enough that they can go out and solve that and have somebody go, wow, you're a startup. your product kind of sucks, but I can't live without this.
Yeah.
And that's generally how great businesses get going. Is it's that kind of thing. It's somebody who a narrow enough, passionate enough person
with narrow enough, with enough of an ego to think that they can do it.
Yeah.
With enough humility to understand, you're going to need to iterate, and if something's not working, you need to
100%.
And with enough grit to no matter what, I'm never giving up.
There you go. Yeah.
How do you find this? How do you I mean, obviously you've had wins, you've had losses as any VC would.
Yeah.
Is there a formula?
There's no formula, but I think that you said it well, which is those are the variables that I weigh. Self-belief. I would call it self-belief versus ego, versus humility, versus grit, and there needs to be some significant amount, with the right amount of charisma mixed in, and recognizing that most people are not entrepreneurs, and nor should they be, and that's fine. And because it's hard to be an entrepreneur. It's mostly pretty lonely and sucky most of the time, right?
It's hard almost all the time. Even when you're winning and making it sucks most of the time.
Yeah, it's hard, it's lonely, it's because for it to be a big outcome that we need in venture, you need to be non-consensus and right. And so, and this is true of I'm sure you can relate to this. Most of the time, everyone thinks you're making a big mistake.
Yeah.
And then at some point it flips over and everybody wants something from you, right? There's never a moment of hey, you're just great. You're stupid and an idiot. And then it's now I really need something from you. I mean, it's just, it's a really complicated thing. And so you got to be non-consensus. And so you got to have the self-belief and the grit to get through, to go after something and this is why, I'm somebody I really, I got an MBA and I really value my MBA education. One of the challenges with, especially what I would characterize as expensive MBAs, they're so focused on social consensus, on peer approval. And boy, if you want to build something special, you better be willing to do something that other people think is kind of a mistake or dumb for a while.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just so unlikely that you're going to find anything unique or interesting or have enough time without all the kind of economic rents being competed away, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's so much of it is the psychology of the team and certainly their experience, what they've done before, and things like that. And the space matters for sure. But yeah, those are the kind of people we would go on the journey with, and that's how we see it. We're embarking on a journey. There's going to be a lot of rough moments of this. Some, I compare it to a road trip. I know you love RV camping. I've done a lot myself, and you think about a great road trip. There's nights when you're at beautiful vistas, incredible campsite. There's nights you're on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're cooking out. You have an amazing. You cook steaks. Everybody's in high spirits, and sometimes it's Wendy's, right? Or it's the worst case, it's a small town KFC, right? Where you're okay, this could go. This is probably the best case is not that great, right? And that's the start.
It's not gonna go well.
Yeah, you're this is food, but that's all we can say. So that's startup life where that's how we say it's hey, it's a partnership to let's see this through. Usually it's 10 years. And there's going to be so many existential moments along the way. And so you as investors and the founding team, you're kind of putting your heads together saying, how do we just it's an endless succession of problems to solve. Yeah. And so you got to have people who find energy and some renewal in that process. Yeah. And a lot of people, it's not really that normal to like it that much.
Even the best, ruins their lives.
Yeah, if you're not careful.
It's really interesting.
It doesn't have to.
Yeah, it doesn't have to, but it
will.
It changes you in an incredible way.
I agree. Yeah, it's I'm sure I love to use the hero's journey metaphor, right? And it's you cross the threshold. You're in the belly of the whale. It's the Jonah metaphor, and you are changed by the journey. Now, I think the message I try to share with entrepreneurs and to our team is it can make you so much better, but you have to be very deliberate about it. And you have to keep people around you that you love, because there's nothing more sad or tragic, right? Is to be successful, right? And then you come back and it's a burned village.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're the one that burned it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, well, I went, and I slew the dragon and I have the golden fleece and I burned the village on my way out. It's like, that sucks. And so that's part of our message to our entrepreneurs is like, let's find ways to have a win across the board. But if you aren't very deliberate about it, and again, I almost made this mistake in my life, you will.
Yeah.
Because it will take everything.
Yeah. Yeah. When something I think about a lot is what you were talking about earlier around the loneliness of entrepreneurship, how lonely it is, and how one, nobody cares about what you're doing. That's like the craziest thing. Like my wife didn't care what I was doing. Like, and I hear that all the time. She's like, just get a job.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah. So you got like that piece of it where it's like, it's super lonely. Nobody cares. Even the people who love you the most cares what you're working on.
No.
And you're all alone and you get hit. Like there's wins.
Yeah. There's wins.
But most of them are losses. And some of them just feel like just punches in the gut.
Yeah.
So I worry, and we've seen this a lot around the mental health of entrepreneurs.
Right.
And like it's something that, we've started to focus on a little bit at Silicon Slopes, although I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But there's been, I've been to funerals, like a lot of funerals over the past 3 to 4 years.
I have too.
What do we do about that?
Yeah, it's just like mental health in general, right? There's no easy fix. And certainly there's an element of like this mental health wise, this is not for most people. There's definitely some, where it's like, hey, it's probably not going to add to your mental health, right? It's not going to increase your mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not going to help.
So you should probably, someone who maybe has just like physical energy, if you have you kind of need an excess of physical energy to do this, you probably need an excess of mental kind of fortitude and self-belief, these things. And of course, even if you have that, it's going to be hard. And so you have to go out of your way. Again, metaphor being like, eat healthy, get sleep, take care of your mental health, and find things that, and I certainly have found those for me. Because again, if you're the leader, probably there's a lot of stuff you can't talk to your team about, or your investors, or your family, because they all resent you for something, and so again, and they all love you for something, but like so you kind of have to find other people, other sources of renewal in your life as you go. And they're different sources for different people. But I think if you do nothing, even if you're the most mentally kind of strong person, you could easily be in a bad place. And we've seen that.
Oh yeah. Over and over again.
Yeah, we've seen that. But I think it's super critical. And, it's like what I say as an investor is like, hey, there's so many times that we're going to an entrepreneur that we've invested in, say, please take some time off. Please take care of yourself, because we're invested in you. And if you, it's like we are aligned. Like you cannot, if you burn out, if you, can't do this or that, then this is not going to work. And, we care. Actually, we have a portfolio. We care more about you than the investment, like you say. I mean, sadly, I've been to funerals.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So sometimes those are the stakes. And so sometimes it's us going to an entrepreneur and say, please quit. Like you did awesome. You left it on the field. We ask nothing more of you. Please, let's shut this thing down. Let's get a job. It's been 7 years.
Yeah.
Like you still have some things left in your personal life, like that we're cheering for you.
Are far more important.
Please.
Yeah.
Stop. Which is it's amazing we have entrepreneurs that are so gritty that we sometimes have to do that. But
yeah, it's wild.
I wish investors actually thought about that more.
Yeah. And entrepreneurs need to figure out how to not tie their identity to their company.
Yeah. That's really hard.
That part is like,
like I say, I think that's,
because when you're, flying high. You're the great, and it's actually when you're flying high when things go south.
Yeah, that's when you burn the village down.
That's when it gets crazy. It's like when you're flying high. Actually, the hard part, you're always learning from those types of things.
That's true. Yeah. That's where it's like try not. It's hard, but you try not to get too high or low.
Yeah.
They're both.
They're both entirely real.
They're both imposters, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I imagine for you, like having a venture fund in this moment probably feels a lot like 2012 or that period.
100%.
Like, where, wow, look at the opportunity and look at the companies. So kind of like to wrap this up, how are you thinking over the next 5-7 years from a Kickstart investment thesis and also like thesis for Utah?
Yeah. So I precisely. So that for us, that's the Fund 2 timeframe. And Fund 2, we have we're fortunate to have a lot of special funds, but Fund 2 is so far the most special.
Yeah.
And so in what was the mix there, I think a lot of it was entrepreneurs who didn't have a ton of access to capital. And so they had to solve deep customer problems and build efficiently. And I think that's what this generation of entrepreneurs is doing. Valuations are a little different. The resource available is a little different. AI is a new layer on the landscape, but that's what we're investing in. And we couldn't be more excited about. Now it's hard for our existing companies that are maybe very big or very small.
Yeah.
Trying to raise money is tough, but new companies raising capital, we'd feel great about the prospects for those companies. So it's for us, it's business as usual, right? So we're still focused pre-seed and seed, Utah, Colorado, and then kind of Intermountain, but like we're probably 50% Utah. We love the stage that we invest in. A lot. It goes in and out of style with other funds to be at our stage. It's hard. It's not for everybody. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of drama. It's a lot of unknowns, and it's not for everybody. I never get too worried about folks who are doing seed or adding seed or getting into seed. Cause I'm like, well,
see you in 10 years.
Yeah. See you in 10 years, right? Cause that's when you'll know if you're good.
Yeah.
And chances are it'll be easy to get drawn to something else.
Yeah.
But we've built a firm around it and we've of people who are willing to sign up for the work and the struggle and the drama and the rewards, but like those take a while.
Yeah.
So I love where we are from that perspective. And I think it's really great to have a healthy ecosystem of other investors and other angels. So this place has never been in a better spot. There's risk to us, just speaking broadly about the ecosystem, but I think we're positioned well to kind of take advantage of the next wave of like AI-driven B2B SaaS and then other related categories. Let's hope energy, picks up in a big way. I think consumer will keep rolling. Another one that people don't know as much about is music AI, which we're the early investor in here. That is, it was a team that spun out of Pluralsight actually. These guys have 50 million users, right? I mean, that's incredible.
So crazy.
Yeah, it's incredible business. So anyway, that answers your question, but I'd say feel great. I mean, it's a gritty, tough time. So I hate to be super optimistic but it's also this is the kind of time that yielded that the best outcome, in the history of Utah tech, I think, and I think it will likely do it again.
I think so too, because this is where you find out who's real or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you need to go through this culling period.
Yeah.
Like let's just cull everybody.
Yeah. And it will happen for VCs too, right?
Yeah.
I've listened to some of the previous episodes, and Carrie talked about that of like, 100%. There's a ton of zombie funds out there that, like we deserve to go out of business just like everybody else does. We're no different.
Well, it was crazy. Yeah. Like even just like 2 or 3 years ago, everyone was launching a fund, or at the very least a syndicate, right?
Yeah.
And literally everyone. It was crazy.
Right.
And now I worry about that.
And I think I think that at the time, it was hard, but we tried to show a lot of discipline about how we interacted with investors and things like SPVs and others. And I think hopefully the LP market learned some lessons, the entrepreneurial market learned some lessons, because let's say you raised a hype round through an SPV.
Mm-hmm.
What you're experiencing now is like oh, there's like nothing behind the SPV. There's no follow-on capital. There's no people. They've moved on. It's like vapor. If you're an LP, you're like, there's no one behind the SPV. And I like, you know what I'm saying? And like, oh, they dramatically overpaid. And like, I have no one that I can talk to at the company. You know, you realize what a kind of empty kind of transaction happened. And I think that's happening to a lot of companies where you go, oh, that's why it's a little penny wise and pound foolish to try to just.
Yeah. Don't just take money from anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. You just because you can do a thing doesn't mean you should always. Yeah. So I feel like there's a retreat to quality across the economy and hopefully in the GP LP world as well.
Yeah. Gavin, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you.